Human life, when observed only from the surface, appears as a sequence of events, encounters, decisions, and accidents woven together into something we call a biography. Yet from a spiritual standpoint, a human biography is not merely the record of what happens to a person. It is the revelation of what the soul carries from long before birth and continues to shape beyond death. In the quiet depths of our inner life, forces work that do not originate in the present moment, nor are they bound to the earthly personality. They stream from earlier earthly lives, from experiences in the spiritual world, from bonds formed with other human souls, and from the intentions that we ourselves once placed into the world's becoming. Rudolf Steiner often emphasized that nothing in a human life is arbitrary. Even those events that strike us as most unexpected, even unjust or bewildering, are threads in a tapestry the soul itself has helped to weave. Karma, in its true sense, is not a mechanism of reward and punishment, but the continual self-shaping of the human being across lifetimes. It is the soul's own striving toward balance, truth, and freedom, unfolding through the circumstances it meets. Everything that befalls us carries within it an echo of our past and a seed of our future. When we look at another person and feel a sudden closeness or resistance, when we encounter someone who alters the direction of our life by a single conversation, when we find ourselves repeatedly drawn to certain individuals or repeatedly confronted by certain challenges, these are not coincidences. According to Steiner's spiritual investigations, such encounters arise from karmic affinities that were prepared long before we entered physical existence. Souls weave their destinies together in the spiritual world before descending again to earth, shaping future meeting so that each can contribute to the other's growth. In this sense, every meaningful human encounter is a continuation of spiritual relationships that transcend one lifetime. Even the outer events that seem merely given, illness, unexpected loss, sudden opportunity, or the rhythm of fate that sometimes lifts us and sometimes weighs upon us, must be understood as part of the soul's schooling. As Steiner describes, experiences that challenge us, that unsettle the comfort of our ego-bound perspective, are often those that create the greatest openings for the soul's evolution. They lead us beyond habitual patterns and compel us to awaken capacities that would otherwise lie dormant. And when a human being looks back over the course of life and senses how even painful events ultimately shape something essential within, they begin to perceive karma not as a burden, but as the deepest expression of their own inner necessity. Before entering earthly life, the human soul moves through a vast region of meaning, clarity, and spiritual intention. There, in the presence of higher beings and other human souls, it perceives with unmistakable certainty which experiences will be required for its further development. Steiner describes this pre-earthly state as one in which the soul clearly understands both its strengths and its unresolved tendencies. It sees, without illusion, what must be balanced in the next incarnation. And from that insight arises the quiet but solemn resolve: I will return to earth and weave these experiences into my becoming. In that realm, we recognize the souls with whom we share past connections. Some have walked beside us through multiple incarnations, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict, and the karmic threads connecting us remain like living currents. With some, we must work through unfinished tasks. With others, we must collaborate in new ones. These agreements are not forced upon us. They arise from the soul's own need for wholeness. Long before we are born, we approach these other souls and shape the outlines of future encounters. You will challenge me here, I will assist you there. Together, we will learn what neither of us can learn alone. Such planning, Steiner emphasizes, is done with full lucidity, far clearer than anything we can achieve while incarnated. But there are also encounters of a different kind. Not all the people we meet in life are bound to us by past karma. Some are souls we met just before birth, standing at the threshold of incarnation like travelers gathering at a port before sailing to different regions. With such souls, we share no history, but a common impulse. Perhaps we were inspired by the same spiritual stream or charged with the same task for humanity's progress. These individuals may later appear as colleagues, collaborators, or companions in a shared cultural mission. Their presence does not evoke karmic intensity, but a quiet recognition, as though we had walked through the same spiritual atmosphere before entering physical form. Once the soul descends into earthly existence, a great forgetting takes place. The clarity of the spiritual world recedes, and earthly consciousness becomes enclosed within the physical body. Yet what was chosen before birth does not vanish. It lives in the depths of the will, in sympathies and antipathies that arise without explanation, in the strange feeling that certain life paths belong to us. Much of what we call intuition, especially in childhood, is the echo of these pre-earthly decisions. Children often sense their destiny more strongly than adults, for they still stand close to the world they left behind. In their games, their longings, their instinctive attractions, one can sometimes discern outlines of their karmic direction. As life progresses, the body increasingly closes around the soul. The senses claim our attention, the intellect takes shape, desires awaken, and we slowly become absorbed by the tasks of earthly existence. This absorption is not a mistake. It is the condition for true freedom. Only a soul that no longer remembers its spiritual origins can learn to rediscover them through its own effort. In the early decades of life, karma works largely from outside, through family, education, chance encounters, and the circumstances into which we are placed. These outer forces shape the personality, but behind them live deeper currents that the soul itself once set in motion. And so we move through childhood into youth and early adulthood, meeting individuals who will become decisive for our inner formation. Some arrive as helpers, some as challengers, and some as catalysts who awaken forces we did not know we possessed. Steiner points out that often the most painful experiences of youth, rejection, disappointment, betrayal, or conflict, carry the strongest karmic threads. They touch precisely those areas of our soul that require transformation. In meeting such trials, we are not being punished. We are being called to awaken capacities that have not yet matured. What presses upon the heart from outside is often the very impulse the soul once chose for its own growth. Through all of this, destiny remains faithful to its purpose. Nothing essential is ever lost. The people who leave us, the paths we abandon, the hopes that collapse, all of these, Steiner says, are woven into our biography with spiritual precision. For the soul does not grow through ease, but through encounters that challenge its boundaries. Each meeting, each imbalance, each unexpected turn is part of a larger harmony that becomes visible only in retrospect. And as we grow, something in us slowly begins to recognize that life is not a series of disruptions, but a continuous dialogue between the human being and the world of spirit. As we move into adulthood, the deeper architecture of our karma begins to reveal itself with increasing force. Steiner explains that, up to a point, life carries us as a river carries a young boat, shaping us through family, education, temperament, and environment. But once we cross the threshold into true adulthood, the soul's own past begins to rise from within like a second current. What once came toward us from outside now begins to well up from inside. Questions emerge that concern not merely outer success, but inner necessity. A person begins to sense, there is something I must become, something only my life's path can reveal. At this stage, karmic relationships intensify. People reappear in our lives precisely at moments when their influence can shape us most powerfully. Sometimes this influence is uplifting. A mentor, a partner, or a friend who awakens deeper forces within us. Sometimes it is confrontational, a rival, an antagonist, or someone who provokes emotions we would rather avoid. According to Steiner's karmic lectures, these figures are not here by accident. They arise at the exact moment when their presence can help us transform a soul quality that remained unbalanced from earlier lives. Destiny does not send them to comfort us. It sends them to complete us. Often, the most significant relationships are the ones that stir intense reactions. A sudden attraction or sudden aversion, an unexplained trust or inexplicable unease. Such experiences mark karmic encounters. Steiner notes that beneath these strong emotional responses live ancient connections. A soul we once wronged may return as someone we feel compelled to help. A soul we once loved may reappear as someone we struggle with. The forms change, but the essential task remains: to bring harmony where there was imbalance, to awaken understanding where there was blindness. Karma is the continuation of relationships reshaped through new earthly circumstances. Yet some of the most transformative encounters are gentle. These are souls with whom we share not past karma, but shared spiritual purpose. We meet them often in collaborative work, shared ideals, or common striving. There is no intense emotional charge, only a quiet recognition, as though we had breathed the same spiritual air before birth. Such individuals help us advance not by confronting our past, but by strengthening our future. They draw us toward the person we are becoming. Steiner calls these companions of destiny, and they play an essential role in shaping the direction of our biography. Life events themselves begin to take on a new tone in these years. Successes bring less vanity. Failures bring deeper questions. A disappointment that once felt like a setback now reveals itself as guidance. A difficulty that once felt like an injustice now appears as an inner necessity. By midlife, many human beings sense that the world is not simply happening to them. The world is speaking to them. Every event, whether joyful or painful, has the character of a call. And in listening to this call, something in the soul begins to awaken. A sense that one's biography has a spiritual author, and that this author is one's own deeper being. Steiner emphasizes that the midlife period, especially around the ages of 35 to 42, marks a decisive threshold. Before it, the human being builds a life. After it, life begins to reveal its meaning. The experiences of the outer world lose some of their binding power, and the soul gradually becomes more inwardly transparent. A subtle spiritual memory stirs, as though the soul begins to recall fragments of the intentions it formed before birth. This does not appear as literal remembrance, but as a deepening sense of purpose. One begins to ask not, "What do I want from the world?" but "What does the world ask of me?" At the same time, the soul confronts itself with greater honesty. One begins to see patterns that run through the biography, repetitive conflicts, familiar disappointments, recurring moral challenges. At first, these patterns seem like fate's burdens, but gradually the soul understands. They are invitations. Each repetition offers a new chance to respond differently, with more clarity, more compassion, more freedom. In this sense, karma is never mechanical. It is always pedagogical. It brings back what we have not yet transformed, not to punish us, but to awaken us. Often, it is at this stage of life that the deeper meetings occur. Encounters with individuals whose presence lifts the veil for a moment, allowing us to perceive who we are and who we might become. Such meetings leave lasting imprints. A single conversation may redirect our path for years. A sudden crisis may reveal strengths we did not know we possessed. A moment of recognition may dissolve years of inner confusion. In these experiences, the soul glimpses that destiny is not a force acting upon it from outside, but the very activity of its own higher being guiding it toward itself. As the human being advances further into life, a quiet but profound turning begins. The soul, once absorbed in establishing itself outwardly, in career, relationships, social identity, and personal hopes, now begins to listen inwardly. Experiences that once seemed external begin to reveal their inner face. The soul senses that every joy has carved a space within it, and every sorrow has planted a seed. Steiner describes this phase as the beginning of true biography, for only now does the human being start to experience life not merely as a sequence of events, but as a spiritual dialogue unfolding between the earthly self and the higher self. A new kind of clarity arises in these years. We begin to meet ourselves, not the self shaped by childhood impressions or youthful ambitions, but the deeper individuality that has journeyed across many lives. This encounter is seldom comfortable. Often, the soul stands before the consequences of earlier decisions, some wise, some mistaken, all formative. Steiner explains that karma now approaches not as outer circumstance, but as inner insight. We begin to recognize patterns that run through our biography. The same type of challenge, the same emotional trigger, the same kind of person who repeatedly appears. These recurrences are not failures. They are karmic rhythms, lessons returning until they are integrated. During this period, the people who enter our lives often serve as mirrors. Some reflect our hidden strengths, others reflect our unresolved shadows. A person who irritates us may confront us with something we must overcome within ourselves. A person who inspires us may reveal qualities we cultivated in earlier lives. Steiner teaches that every relationship, whether harmonious or difficult, offers the soul an opportunity for moral development. No encounter is spiritually neutral. Even a brief exchange with a stranger can stir forces that reshape the inner being. And those with whom we share profound bonds, whether of love or conflict, are usually souls with long karmic histories intertwined with our own. What appears outwardly as conflict often appears inwardly as cooperation. Two souls may clash bitterly on the surface, yet in the spiritual world they are working together toward mutual growth. One challenges, the other endures, one awakens, the other transforms. Steiner stresses that the karmic connection between souls is never one-sided. Both are learning. The seeming antagonist may be the very being who helps us take the decisive step toward freedom, and the beloved companion may, through pain or separation, awaken depths of compassion we would not otherwise have discovered. Karma is not merely the balancing of past deeds, it is the evolution of love. Around the beginning of the later decades of life, often between the ages of 49 and 56, Steiner describes another spiritual threshold. At this point, life begins to hand back its meaning to the soul. Outward striving loses some of its urgency, and inward questioning becomes more essential. We begin to ask, what have I truly become? What forces have ripened within me? What still seeks transformation? These are not intellectual questions, but existential ones. They mark the moment when earthly biography starts to align with eternal biography. As this inwardness deepens, gratitude often begins to flow. Not sentimental gratitude, but spiritual gratitude born from understanding. We begin to see that every person who crossed our path brought a gift, whether wrapped in joy or difficulty. The parent who challenged us, the friend who supported us, the adversary who wounded us, the stranger who appeared for a moment and vanished. Each played a role in awakening something essential within. The soul begins to perceive the wisdom of its own destiny, as if a hidden architecture suddenly becomes visible. This is also the time when the guiding spiritual being, the one who accompanied us from the spiritual world into earthly life, draws nearer again. Throughout youth and adulthood, this guardian remained mostly in the background so that we could exercise our freedom. But in the later years, the guardian's presence becomes more perceptible. Many people feel it not as a voice or a vision, but as a deepened conscience, a subtle guidance, or a calm certainty that accompanies decisive moments. It is the same being who helped shape our karmic path before birth, now helping us gather the fruits of that path. Life's events in this period often carry a reflective quality. Encounters from earlier decades may return in new forms, offering closure or deeper understanding. Old wounds rise not to torment, but to heal. Past decisions reappear in memory, not to accuse, but to illuminate. The soul begins to weave its experiences into a larger whole, preparing them for the spiritual world into which it will soon ascend again. Every insight formed in these years becomes spiritual substance that continues beyond death. As earthly life moves deeper into its later decades, the soul begins a gradual loosening from the physical body. This is not withdrawal from life, but a quiet reorientation. The senses lose some of their dominance, while memory and inner experience gain new depth. Steiner explains that the etheric forces which once streamed outward to build and sustain the body now begin to turn inward. They illuminate the inner landscape of the biography, allowing the human being to perceive connections that were formerly hidden. Past events rise with new clarity, not as burdens, but as revelations. The soul begins to see its life as a whole rather than as a succession of unconnected moments. During this time, human encounters take on a more transparent quality. Individuals who accompany us in older age often belong to karmic circles that must be completed before the life's end. Some arrive to reconcile what was left unresolved. Others appear so that we may offer something essential to them. Their presence is not random. In the karmic lectures, Steiner repeatedly shows that souls who stand around a person at the end of life frequently belong to long-standing spiritual relationships that span centuries. Even short encounters can carry profound meaning in these years, for the soul is more receptive, more open to perceiving the moral essence behind each relationship. There is a delicate process at work. The soul reviews its path, and in this review, it transforms experiences into spiritual substance. Sufferings become compassion. Mistakes become wisdom. Joys become strength. Steiner compares this inner transformation to the way a plant draws nourishment from its environment and forms seed. The soul, in its later years, gathers the moral fruits of its biography and prepares them as the seeds of the next incarnation. Even memories that seem painful or unresolved can become sources of light when understood in their karmic context. Nothing experienced with sincerity is lost. Events during this period often have the character of culmination. The soul may meet again individuals from earlier phases of life, sometimes unexpectedly, as though destiny circles back to complete unfinished work. Old conflicts may soften, or their meaning becomes clear. A person we struggled with may suddenly appear in a gentler light. A person we once overlooked may reveal unsuspected depth. Steiner notes that this ripening of understanding is one of the most profound forms of karmic balancing. True resolution occurs not through outward reconciliation alone, but through inner insight, through seeing the other person's being with spiritual objectivity. In these years, the guiding spiritual being draws especially close. Steiner indicates that the guardian angel, who once helped us shape the karmic outlines of this life before birth, now assists in gathering what we have accomplished. Many individuals describe a growing sense of accompaniment, a moral intuition, a quiet assurance, or an inner strengthening during times of uncertainty. This guidance does not impose direction. It awakens recognition. It helps the soul see what its life has truly meant, beyond success or failure, beyond approval or disappointment. The guardian being helps us perceive the biography as a spiritual deed. As physical forces wane, inner forces wax. The soul becomes more independent of the outer world and more aligned with the world of spirit. Thoughts arise with greater depth. Feelings become more spacious, and the will slowly detaches from the immediacy of earthly impulses. This is not a decline, but a metamorphosis. In Steiner's view, the later decades of life represent a rising into a higher form of consciousness, a preparation for the transition into the spiritual realms. The soul gathers warmth from the moral experiences of life and light from the insights gained. These become its wings for the journey beyond death. And then, in this ripened state, a profound clarity often dawns, the realization that nothing has been without purpose. The people who challenged us and the people who comforted us, the losses that shattered us and the successes that uplifted us, each wove a thread into the tapestry of our becoming. We begin to perceive that our life was not simply lived, but guided, shaped from within and without by the wisdom of our own eternal individuality. This recognition fills the soul with a quiet, solemn gratitude. Gratitude not for the pleasantness of life, but for its meaning. In this light, old age becomes a sacred season. It is not a withdrawing, but a gathering, not an ending, but a preparation. The human being begins to step inwardly toward the threshold of the spiritual world with increasing serenity, carrying the fruits of earthly experience like a harvest into eternity. As the final chapter of earthly life unfolds, the soul approaches the threshold of death with a new kind of awareness. The outer senses may weaken, but the inner senses begin to awaken subtly. Steiner describes how, as the etheric body slowly loosens from the physical organism, a quiet illumination spreads through the soul. One begins to perceive life not from within the stream of events, but as though standing just above it. Moments long forgotten may suddenly reappear with extraordinary clarity. People sometimes speak of a softening of the boundaries between past and present, between inner and outer experience. This is the first gentle stirring of the life review that awaits the soul after death. During this time, the soul's relationships become especially transparent. Those who remain close, family members, old friends, even those with whom there were unresolved tensions, often carry profound karmic meaning. Their presence supports the final tasks of the incarnation: forgiveness that was not spoken, gratitude not yet expressed, understanding that has not yet ripened. Steiner explains that even when words cannot be exchanged, or when old wounds cannot be outwardly resolved, the inner act of forgiveness or insight is karmically decisive. It radiates beyond the physical world, reshaping the destiny shared with that other soul. Nothing essential depends on whether reconciliation is outwardly seen. Karma works inwardly through recognition. The guardian being who guided the soul before birth and throughout earthly life now draws very near. In the last days and hours, many experience a sense of profound calm, as though an invisible presence were lifting the weight of earthly concerns. This is not hallucination or fantasy. In Steiner's spiritual science, it is the moment when the guardian being prepares the human individuality for the transition into the spiritual world. The soul senses, even if dimly, that it is not stepping into darkness, but into a realm it once knew well. The threshold of death becomes less a boundary and more a doorway. Then comes the moment of passing. To earthly eyes it appears as a final cessation. To the soul it is an astonishing expansion. Freed from the body, the human being experiences a vast release. The etheric body, no longer bound by the constraints of physical form, spreads out in a majestic tableau. Steiner describes this as the panoramic life review, a complete, vivid unveiling of the entire biography. Every joy, every hardship, every meeting, every motive is revealed in a single grand vista. Time dissolves. The whole life stands present at once, but now the soul does not experience events from its own perspective alone. It feels how every deed lived in the hearts of others, how our words warmed or wounded, how our presence uplifted or burdened another human being. This is the first true moral awakening after death. This life review is not judgment in the earthly sense. It is clarity. We see what our life was without distortion, without self-justification. In that light, the soul begins to sense the next necessity, the transformation of remaining egoism and the strengthening of capacities that were only partially developed. After the life review, the soul moves through spiritual realms where it gradually releases the unpurified remnants of earthly desire, illusion, and attachment. This is not punishment, but purification, allowing the soul to regain the spiritual freedom it had before incarnation, enriched now by the fruits of earthly experience. Then comes one of the most profound phases, the shaping of the next existence. Together with spiritual beings and the guiding individuality, the soul forms new intentions. These intentions are not wishes, but recognitions. Here is where my being still seeks balance. Here is where I must return to serve others. Here is where my love must deepen, my courage must grow, my understanding must widen. In this way, the karma of the coming life begins to take form, and once again, the soul approaches other souls, some with whom it shares ancient bonds, others with whom it shares future tasks, and agreements are woven for the next incarnation. When the time comes to descend again toward earthly existence, the soul chooses, with immense clarity, the family, the body, the temperament, and even the difficulties that will best enable its next stage of growth. It selects the very conditions that will awaken its sleeping forces. Everything the soul meets on earth has its roots in this pre-birth moment of divine lucidity, and thus the cycle begins anew. The soul incarnates, forgets, awakens slowly through destiny, and gradually transforms the threads it once wove. When we look at a human biography from this perspective, the entire course of life becomes a revelation of the soul's eternal journey. Each incarnation is not an isolated story, but a chapter in a much larger book, a book the soul itself is writing across the ages. Earthly events, no matter how random they may appear, are the outer expressions of deeper currents flowing from one life to the next. And every relationship, whether brief or lifelong, joyful or painful, is a meeting between souls who have agreed to assist one another in their unfolding. Steiner emphasizes that destiny is never the work of a single lifetime. The friendships that feel immediately intimate, the conflicts that seem strangely familiar, the moments of recognition that arise without explanation, all point to connections formed long before birth. The people who enter our life at decisive moments are not merely companions along the way. They are co-creators of our evolution. A karmic encounter may come to us disguised as a coincidence, a challenge, a blessing, or even a loss. But behind each stands a spiritual necessity that we ourselves once shaped. To meet this truth consciously is to understand that every soul who crosses our path is part of our becoming. Events, too, speak with a karmic voice. A missed opportunity may protect us from a path we were never meant to follow. A sudden illness may slow us at the very moment our soul needs reflection. A failure may awaken forces of humility or courage that would have slept otherwise. In the spiritual view of karma, life is not something happening to us. It is something happening for us, not in the sense of fate being kind or unkind, but in the sense that destiny is shaped by the soul's own striving toward balance and freedom. Every experience is meaningful because it contributes to the unfolding of our moral and spiritual individuality. In the depths of our being, there lives a higher self, the eternal individuality that exists beyond birth and death. This higher self accompanies us throughout our earthly existence, though Its voice is often faint beneath the noise of desire, fear, and daily demands. Yet, at key moments of life, during crisis, profound joy, transformative encounters, or moral awakening, this higher self breaks through and we feel guided. Steiner describes this as the moment when the human eye recognizes its own spiritual origin. It is the same eye that shaped our destiny before birth and will gather its fruits after death. To sense this guiding presence is to experience a quiet certainty. My life has meaning. I am becoming who I am. The ultimate purpose of karma is not the settling of accounts, it is love, not sentimental love, but the deepening of the soul's capacity to understand, to reconcile, to transform, and to create harmony. Through life's joys and sorrows, through meetings and partings, through mistakes and victories, the soul learns to love more fully and more freely. Each incarnation expands this capacity, and every karmic thread seeks resolution in the light of love. When two souls overcome bitterness, when understanding dawns after long conflict, when compassion arises in place of judgment, karma is fulfilled and a new freedom is born. And so, the biography of a human being is far more than the story of a single life. It is a spiritual symphony composed across centuries, each voice echoing from earlier movements and carrying forward into later ones. We live our lives from the inside, often seeing only fragments, yet from the spiritual world, the whole reveals itself as coherent and luminous. The human soul grows across incarnations by transforming every experience into inner strength, every encounter into deeper understanding, every trial into moral substance. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. Everything is woven into the soul's ascent. When death arrives, it does not erase the biography. It completes it. The soul rises into the spiritual world carrying the essence of what it has become. There, in full clarity, it prepares the next step in its eternal evolution, and when it returns to earth again, it brings with it the fruits of past lives, the wisdom, courage, and love it has cultivated, and once more enters the world to transform experience into being. Thus, the human journey continues, from life to life, from encounter to encounter, from trial to awakening. And through it all, destiny is not an external force, but the unfolding of our own eternal essence, a quiet, patient becoming that guides us toward greater truth, deeper freedom, and ever-expanding love.